Thank you very much, Andreas. Let me just share my screen. And once I've done that, okay, so my name's Neil, and I'm here with my colleague Amanda Pattist, and we're from an organisation called Vis for Social Good. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I've only got 5 minutes to talk about it because the rest of the time what we're going to do is show you some great visualizations that some of our volunteers have done for this conference. I'm going to show you some visualizations all about refugees and migration. So it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour through Vis for Social Good, and then hopefully it'll just give you a little bit of a taster for what we do and some of the power of visualization. So it was all started off by our founder, a lady called Chloe Seng. Back in 2016, she gave a sort of passionate speech about how a lot of us like to do visualization for fun, but wouldn't it be great if we could actually do something for good, use that for social good. And as a result of that speech, she went and founded Vis for Social Good. So that became a website. This is what the website looks like. So you can either sign up and be a volunteer, or you can be a non-profit and partner with us to launch a project. And that's how we've got our relationship with Kiron. It soon gathered pace. In 2017, it won an industry award. That's Chloe collecting a community visualization award. These are like the Oscars for data viz. I will show this picture because one of those up on that giant wall is mine. So that just represents some of the success that we had from early days. And in terms of how it works, we have a number of projects. So a non-profit might want to launch a data visualization project. We then have hackathons. Now they might be actually somewhere in a different local city. They might be on site like this, or they might be essentially online. And with Kiron this time, we've been working online and just sort of getting a group of people over 2 weeks to produce visualizations. And then that finishes, we call that impact. So really, hopefully what we can produce will then allow the nonprofit that we're working with to really create a little bit of impact, publicize something, make great use of their data, which they otherwise haven't been able to use, and make impact in whatever way we can. So it's truly global. We've done 30 projects or so over the few years, lots of local chapters and thousands of volunteers now. And as you can see, these are some of the partners we've worked with, really large and really small. There's a lovely variety. And here's just some of our local chapters. That very middle one was us in Berlin last year, the Tableau conference, and there's also local chapters all around the world. And for those who are interested, this is basically how we ask people to get involved. Just go to our website or follow us on Twitter. And then that's it, you can just visualize the data. Another reason I want to rush through is I promised everyone we had such a great level of participation for this project. We're delighted to show 5 of our visualizations and the volunteers who created them. But I really wanted to make sure that everyone who took part would get a chance to see those today. So I'm really going to give a whistle-stop tour through all of these, and I wish I could do some more injustice, but I'm really just going to sort of go through these a few seconds at a time. So I had this from Soha, gorgeous radial chart on migrants. We had this from Samantha, and I'm really sorry that we've got some amazing long form vises, which PowerPoint doesn't do it justice. So you may not be able to see this, but you can see some of the visual impact this has. And if you imagine this was in poster format, it's absolutely packed with high impact information. We had this from our friend from Japan, Kamegaki. Again, some brilliant Kiron style visualization. This, I wish you could see this more close up. This is all about coming to Australia from Kimberly Scott, beautiful viz. This from Amelia, all about forced displacement. I'm so sorry to go through this so quickly, but we've got so much to see. This from Evelina, I love this one. A gorgeous use of what we call a Sankey chart, really showing the number of people going from one country to another. A lovely one here from Noel Basil, looking specifically at migration across the Mediterranean. Kamigaki again, just a great sort of publicity image here for Kiron, explaining what they do. So a gorgeous piece of design here, all about displaced communities in the Bahamas from Ashishs. This one here from Giovanni from Indonesia. He really featured on hope, so he's made this a story of Syrian refugees. This from Frederick over in Australia, looking at the global situation of refugees there, very striking. From Jason Lee, another really detailed picture of displacement here globally. Yasushi from Japan, another one really sort of highlighting Kiron. Here's one from Keita, again putting global refugee stories in numbers. Shivam here has done some gorgeous work. It's not showing up brilliantly here, but if you see this close up, again, you see the full global story of migration. I love the impact here of this one from Ada. I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing some of these names, but she's got a really nice, impactful look here. Taiho, a really sort of, I love her headline here, while we are in our comfy homes. It really gives you something to think about. This from Jason Lowe. There's some really nice interactive analysis you can dig into here. Nearly done here. This from Nina, again looking at internal displacements, this time over a decade. This one from Diana. I love this one. Again, this is showing things in a scatter plot and really looking at Southeast Asia in particular. And that was it. And I haven't even shown you the 5 that we've picked for today. So really just to show that we've got a mix of global and local. We've got stories which look at different factors behind migration, and we'll talk about some of these today. We've got some of them which have got a real call to action. So it's great if you can have a visualization, but then which also highlights the sponsor or the nonprofit you're working with and says, you know, click here if you really want to be involved. So today we're going to hand over to Annie, to Ashishs, to Dara, to Louise. Now Rob can't be with us today, but my colleague Amanda has volunteered to, or has been volunteered to talk through his amazing viz as well. There's a get involved sign again, and I will stop right there. I could talk about viz for as social good all day, but we only have a few minutes, so instead I'm going to go and ask if our first volunteer wants to talk through their viz, and that's Annie. I think you'd like to take over and share your screen. I'll stop mine.
1 second. All right, hopefully everyone can see. So hello everyone, my name is Annie. As you can probably tell, I'm from the United States, so it's very exciting for me to be among, you know, a panel here of people who are from all over the world. And I have not been a longtime Tableau user. I have started using the program about 2 months ago, so I'm very new to all of this, but I do have a background in design and research, so it's been really exciting for me to get involved in Viz for Social Good, and I'm really honored to be here, so thank you. My viz is a little bit simpler than I know some of the other ones we have here, so I'm going to run through it pretty quickly because I know we're tight on time. But really, I wanted to be able to tell a story that was super relevant to what's going on right now and also tied back strongly to Kiron and their mission. So I know that their mission is focused directly around educational access and what is more relevant right now, unfortunately, than COVID-19. So when I started to kind of identify the key story here, I really wanted to see how education could tie into both migrants and the impact of COVID-19 on these populations. So after doing some third-party research, I came across some really interesting information from Migration Data Portal that was basically talking about how migrants and refugee populations are far more likely than the aggregate population as a whole of any country to work in low-income jobs or in jobs where there's no access to remote work or work from home. So as we can imagine, this puts these populations at a much higher risk of infection, because unlike those who are fortunate enough to be able to, limit their access to public or limit their interactions with others, many people within these populations just aren't able to do that. So I wanted to be able to kind of show this in an interesting way and tie it all back to how Kiron's dedication towards educational access would kind of help to upskill and maybe provide people access to educational resources that would help them get out of these low income jobs and maybe, lead better, safer lives in the age of COVID. So the challenge here for me was that while there's a huge depth of COVID data, there isn't a ton of data that kind of reaches the breadth that goes across how COVID is affecting different kinds of people. So really what I was wanting was COVID and migrant data, which I could not find anywhere. So I basically had to go in and create my own data set, which honestly was fairly simple. Basically, I needed total population for each country, total migrant population for each country, and total reported cases for each country. And I just want to put an emphasis on reported, because there are plenty of countries that may not have a lot of testing going on or other factors that may lead those numbers to be lower or skew lower than they may actually be. So what I ended up developing here was this quad chart that kind of spans between COVID case totals and then migrant population data. So here in this upper right quadrant, we see countries that are or have migrant populations that would be at the highest risk. So these are countries that have large migrant populations, but also have really high COVID case totals. So through this viz, you can go in, we can use the tooltips to kind of see what these countries are. My country here, USA, appears in this quadrant, unfortunately. And we can also filter by continent. So if we only would want to see North America, then we can go in and, select what we want. My internet's a little slow, so apologies. But overall, I just wanted to provide something that was really simple, that would tie this data into Kiron's mission, and hopefully would provide just an interesting perspective on world events that are going on right now and how they're impacting these populations. And I'm happy to take any questions, or I can pass it off to the next participant.
Yeah, let's pass it on to the next one. We're a bit pressed for time already, since we want to have a few minutes for the Q&A at the end. Neil, who's the next one again?
Ashish.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. I'll start sharing my screen. And as you guys can see, it's a very long quiz. Awesome. So hi everyone, I'm Ashish and I built a visualization on internal displacement. And the reason why I chose to build this visualization was because I thought there wasn't enough content being shared or enough stories being shared regarding internal displacement, and most of us do end up getting confused between migration and refugees. So internally displaced people in general, they are forced to flee their homes because of different reasons. They can be conflict, natural disasters, or violation of human rights. And these peoples do not necessarily cross an international border, and they still remain the confines of their country, but they are still left vulnerable in their own countries after they have to flee their homes. And as we can see from this chart here, the big number 288 million really caught my eye, because that's the number of people that have been displaced in the past 12 years, with the maximum being in China, India, and Philippines. But each country has their own story, and people from different countries have been affected in many different ways. So I wanted to tell a story of each and every country in this visualization. And if you see here, around 81.7 million people, sorry for that, around 82 million people were displaced in China alone, and almost 44.7 million people were displaced in India alone. So in this visualization, I just wanted to answer three key questions. how many, why, and when. So the first chart here answers the question how many, and when I have seen how many people were displaced, then I wanted to see why they were displaced. And there were three key reasons: flood, storm, and earthquake. And they were weather related and geological phenomenon. And if we click on a country here, we can see that in China, almost 42% of the people were displaced because of flood, and 33% people were displaced because of storm, and almost 22% people were displaced because of earthquake. So once I have answered these two questions, I just wanted to look at the major events in the history and major disasters in the history to see how they contributed to different displacements. So we can see that there is a spike here in 2008, and almost 3 million people were displaced in China because of that devastating earthquake. And then almost 15 million people were displaced in 2010 in different provinces of China. And then another 11 million were displaced in Pakistan. And then 9 million people were displaced in 2011 in the Himalayan flash floods that occurred in the Himalayan state of India. And then almost 2.6 million people were displaced in Nepal in an earthquake that devastated the country in 2015. So after I have answered all these questions, I just wanted to give a call to action for the community to advocate for these people, to advocate for these vulnerable communities around the world. And if we can make their lives better, I'm happy to take any questions as well.
Feel free, all the attendees, to post your questions in the Q&A feature or in the chat. We might also have the option to ask the questions directly to the panelists at the end if we still have a few minutes left. Yeah, so let's hand over.
Shall we take them at the end so that we give a good chance for everyone?
Yeah. So let's continue to Dara, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Share my screen. Hopefully that's coming up for everyone. Yeah, I'm Dara from Australia. Like Ashish, I also looked at internally displaced peoples. However, I kind of zoomed in on one particular kind of aspect that was available in the data set that I used. And that was looking at weather-related disasters and linking that to the broader debate, or not debate, sorry, the broader climate emergency that has been affecting us, affecting the Earth over the last 100 years or so. So this is a very scrolly telling data visualization, kind of broken up into three chapters with 3 chapters on the page with a variety of different interactives. So you can already see here that about 71% of newly displaced IDPs in 2019 were because of weather. And I then kind of broke that up into these 3 chapters, looking at what I call the catalyst for displacement, which climate-related displacement, and looking at the kind of number of disasters, natural disasters happening over time. You can see here that it really starts to spike up in around 1980. And in fact, over the last 20 or so years, we're now seeing about 300 weather-related natural disasters that result in internally displacements of people per year. And part of this visualization, it has like, I point out significant events. So for instance, the big one in, where is it? 2013, I don't have it here actually. Hurricane Katrina in the US is one that I've added in as well, showing that while the vast majority of displacements do happen in the developing world, it does also affect the more, I suppose, more, I guess, richer countries. And I kind of go into chapter 2 here, the consequence, looking at this kind of map, pinpointing out where natural disasters happen and how big the displacement of people occur. As Ashishs pointed out in his viz just before, the vast majority do actually happen in places like China and India and also the Philippines. and also across Africa as well. And then finally, at the end, the third chapter of this visualization is looking at the cost. And while I have estimated a cost here based off some research done by the, I think it's the International Displacement Crisis Management Center. Sorry, I can't remember the exact, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, sorry. So some data off that, they estimated actual cost per person in US dollars, and I've kind of got that in the visualization. But the broader point I want to kind of actually bring here is that some of these costs are in time, and this is where I think it is very relevant to the mission of Kiron. Is, you know, I've pointed out here that up may mean up to about 10 million children are being internally displaced every year, and they're missing out on appropriate healthcare and education due to, you know, these events that are happening due to climate change. So there's a lot on my viz, but I thought in the interest of time I just kind of skip through it. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and happy to talk, stick around and talk later.
Yeah, I think we can even take a little more time at the end for those who still have time, because this is such an interesting topic, and I think we are seeing amazing work here. Yeah, so in order to do some justice to the work that has been created, we might be able to take a little more time. Before we get to the Q&A, we have two more people. Louise.
Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Thanks very much for including me today. It really is interesting looking at the visualizations everybody's created. So I'm just sharing my screen here, so hopefully it'll come through for you. So just a brief introduction. So my name is Louise Shorten, and I am a data visualization practitioner and trainer based in Dublin, in Ireland. Yes, I'm also a Viz for Social Good chapter leader. So I've organised a couple of hackathons, and I really think it's a great initiative. So so I'm just going to quickly talk about the topic that I've chosen, why I chose the topic of direct provision in Ireland, and I'll explain what that means, and then talk a bit about my approach, where I gathered data from. And then I'll just point out some further resources in case anyone wants to find out any more information. So, so I wanted to pick a local topic. So direct provision is something that's been on my radar as kind of something that's problematic in Ireland. And so people have been raising awareness about it more and more over the last number of years. So I'll explain what it is. So when asylum seekers come to Ireland, they are accommodated in direct provision centres. And this system was introduced 20 years ago as an interim measure or solution to provide people who are seeking protection, international protection, to allow them somewhere to stay. So the idea was always that they would stay there around 6 months or so. But
hey Louise, this is Neil. Sorry to interrupt. I don't think we can see your screen.
Okay, thanks, Neil. I'll just go with that again, or I'll go try and share again. Or is that there now?
Perfect. Yes,
perfect. Okay, thanks for that. So this is the visualization that I've created. So it's a one-page look at direct provision, and it flows kind of from left to right, and there are 4 different panels. So so there are a number of reasons. I'll just highlight a few of the reasons why it's problematic, and mainly is the reason is that a lot of people are staying far longer than it was ever anticipated. So there's a lot of overcrowding, and people are so the centres themselves are at capacity, and as a result, a lot of emergency accommodation is being used. So if we just look at the first panel there, I'm just kind of summarising, giving an overview of the so I just wanted to show an overview of where those centres are. So they're kind of dispersed across the country, and the bar chart there is just showing that we have there's about, at the year end in 2019, there were about 6,000 people in the centres, and then there were about 1,600 people in emergency accommodation. And that's there are problems with that, in that that's people being put up in hotels and guest houses, and it's expensive. It's not good value for money. So something had to change. Now, the good news is that as of last week in Ireland, as part of the government, for the programme for government, there's a commitment to end this policy and to move over towards a non-profit approach. So another reason it's problematic is that the service providers were private and making profits. So over at the bottom right-hand corner, I've highlighted who the main suppliers were to the whole system. So I've brought data together from a few different sources. So there was no kind of great one data source that I went to. So I looked on the Irish Refugee Council's website, and I found a document they've published quite recently, an annual review, which is really detailed, looking at various different aspects, a lot of qualitative data. So I used Tableau software to pull out some of the tables, some of the information, and that's what I've used to create a lot of these graphs. So I'm not going to go through them all, but the visualization is on Tableau Public with all of the links as well that I used in my analysis. I also read up there are a lot of Irish Times articles, so I've linked to those as well by Circa Pollock and Gordon Deegan, and information that was obtained from a Freedom of Information from Kevin Lynch and Ken Fox. So I wanted to have just one overview to kind of have just a starting point for somebody who wants to find out more about direct provision. I'd also like to highlight Massey, who are a movement, they're the movement for asylum seekers in Ireland, and they've been campaigning to end direct provision for a long time. So if you want to find out more information, I'd advise you to check out their website or the Irish Refugee Council's website. Also, last shout out, there's a company called We Make Good, and they're currently selling face masks for during the pandemic, and for every mask that's purchased, one goes to someone in direct provision. So that's me. So happy to take questions afterwards, and you can find me on Twitter at @shortenl. Okay, thanks a million. I'll pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you so much. So Amanda is the last to go.
All right, fantastic. Louise, I'm going to have to ask you to stop sharing your screen.
Sure, yeah, just doing it now.
Thank you.
Good.
All right, well, I'm Amanda Patis from Vis for Social Good. Today, I'm going to be standing in for Rob Radburn, who unfortunately couldn't make it to the call today. I'm going to keep this, I'm going to try and keep this as quick as I can. Let's put that on full screen. All right, just move my face out of the way. Perfect. Okay. So as I said, I have the opportunity today to stand in for Rob Radburn, which is an absolute honor. This man is, he makes incredible data visualization, and I hope I can do it justice. Okay, so just to whiz through this, what Rob looked at is where migrants came from, and where they are going to in Africa. So for this, he used data that was collected mostly, well, he used United Nations data, which is mostly population data with a little bit of imputation, and it looks at 55 states and territories across Africa as of 2019. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of an idea of what the visualization is about, first he goes into explaining what a migrant is. So a migrant is a person who is living in a country other than the place that they were born. It gives a few really great statistics about the migration in Africa. So from 2010 to 2019, the number of migrants rose more within Africa than in any other country. And as of 2019, the migration within Africa reached up to 21 million. And out of, yes, okay. So what Rob chose to focus on is the flow of migration within the country. And to do this, he built this incredible map. So basically what he did was a spatial analysis of the patterns of origin to destination of the migrants. And I'm completely flabbergasted by the way he put this together. It's incredible. So a quote from Rob himself. Basically what he said was it's always actually very challenging to show the to and from migration, and usually this ends up as a big hairball of a mess trying to figure out where this comes from. So what he did for his inspiration is he used this kind of map, which is based on papers created by, and I'm gonna probably say this very wrong, but the Geocentric Center in London. And he does admit that admittedly, at first it's hard to look at, but actually once you look at it, it's super simple to read and I absolutely love it. So essentially what you have here in this is a grid. So usually these migrations are shown in matrices. And what he's done is he's combined this with a geographical representation within this grid. So each of the states is represented as a square in the larger grid, which makes up the shape of Africa. And then within each cell, you have a smaller representation of the same grid. And in yellow, you can see where the migrants come from. And then dispersed around that in the different colors is where the migrants have gone to. And this is colored by the number of migrants, with the darker colors being more migration, or yeah, more people. So yeah, I thought this was super interesting to see. There were a couple of things that stood out to me, not being the viz maker, but which I thought were super interesting, was that generally, at least within African movement, at least from this representation, it seems that migration kind of stays relatively close to the source. I also thought it was really interesting to see that there was quite a lot of migration out of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He's got lots of tooltips which also show, because my geography is a little bit rubbish, it's nice to see here also like where people are actually going to and the numbers of these. I noticed that a lot of people are going to the Ivory Coast, to Sudan, Ethiopia, and actually quite a lot of people going to South Africa. In the interest of time, I'm going to stop there and let you explore this visualization. But I'm, again, absolutely in awe of the simplicity of how Rob has been able to show the flow of migration, which is not an easy thing to show, but done really nicely here and serves as a really incredible basis for asking more questions and figuring out the reasons for why people are moving. And with that, I shall, I think, hand back to Neil.
All right, thank you all so much. I'm not Neil, but I think I will start the Q&A now. So thanks so much for the presentations. I had no idea what amazing ways there are to use data. And I think those illustrations tell beautiful or also difficult, but very interesting stories. We have a few questions already through the chat. I'm going to read some of them out. And then maybe the panelists or Neil can decide who can take that question. So let's take another 5-6 minutes for a couple of questions before we close off the session. So one of our participants asked us, for all presentations, what I see is that there's an increasing trend in the number of displaced people. So my question is, how do you forecast? Does it reach a peak point, or if not, is the national or international organizations ready for such drastic changes? Is there anyone from the panelists who would like to take this?
I'm happy to answer that. And what I would say is that we as sort of volunteers and visualizers are not necessarily the experts. We're great at maybe finding out the story. So what visualization could be really useful for is showing in different ways, hey, have you seen how much migration is increasing? And maybe like in Rob's map, have you seen which countries it's particularly happening, or in which areas? And then in terms of forecasting, or in terms of maybe policy making on it, that's when it's great to work with nonprofits to say, almost look, this is what we found. Does this help you to then take this and make decisions, or decide on how you might want to help people? So we don't necessarily sort of make forecasts like that, but we try and see the story in the data and visualize these things so that we can help people make these decisions.
We don't have so many other questions, so feel free to keep posting your questions, or if you like, you can also unmute your microphone and ask the question to the group. Note that the recording is still going, but feel free to also share your thoughts, any comments, by unmuting your microphone, so any of the participants.
I might just actually jump in and say somebody has asked in the Q&A, how does one start a project with Viz for Social Good? So I feel like as I'm wearing the t-shirt today, like Amanda or I should answer this. But really, I would say just get in touch with us. I think it was one of the screenshots of my presentation. If you go to the website, there is a page that says start a project. Let me just see. Well, I won't share my screen, but yes, you can basically apply via our website, and if you click on start a project, it comes through to us, the team, and we'd be delighted to talk to you and see how we can help. Because no two projects are really the same. I mean, they have a similar kind of structure, but you know, if it's a small project or a large project, or you know, if you have a conference or some social media or whatever you want it for, then usually we can help you. So it's go to visforsocialgood.com.
Are there any more comments from the...
Oh, thank you.
Any more questions? Otherwise, I also have a... Oh, actually, there is more questions. What makes a data visualization piece successful, in your opinion? That is a brilliant question, I think.
That's a great
What makes it successful? Who wants to take this one?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, a really good data visualization tells a really good story, really provides context, leads you through what that story is, and really has a call to action as well, which we have seen quite a bit of here, which is fantastic. If anyone else wants to chip in there, please do.
What do the others think? Anything to add? Any other views or comments?
Yeah, I'll contribute there. It's a good question because it is hard to measure. I think if it starts conversations and if it includes a call to action, as it was included in some of those examples there, and it actually makes people do something like, you know, act on that, donate, then definitely it's going to be successful to a certain degree. But even if it promotes conversations, it opens up topics, I think that's, you know, it can be deemed successful as well. So yeah, good question.
Another one, someone commented, thank you, the visualizations you showed us look incredible and very interesting. Will we be able to access these visualizations? I don't see them on the website, but would love to explore more. Neil, where can they find the illustrations?
Everyone has a link to these. The majority were done on a platform called Tableau, which means there's a link where people can see them on the website. So what I think I will do after this is maybe we'll stay in touch with you guys at Kiron and send these links on, and perhaps we'll everyone.
Did you just freeze?
Neil, you're breaking up a little bit. Maybe you can repeat the last two sentences you just said.
Oh, it's my age. I can never remember the last two sentences I said. But I think I was probably just saying that we can probably stay in touch with you guys, and so we can publicize and circulate these links because they're freely available. For the purposes of today, it's easy just to show things on screen and show the non-interactive versions of things. But we'd be happy to circulate these links. They're all online.
Hemel has a question as well. Is Tableau the only tool that can be used, or is it open to use any tool? You can use any tool to visualize the data and then submit the visualization. What we do is, if you have a link to it where you can publish it, we would always, well, what we have been doing so far is posting a screenshot of it on Twitter, and then we collect all of the inputs through there. So if you do have something you can share, that's great. And yeah, any visualization tool.
In the ones that I showed you earlier, there was at least one in Power BI, there was at least one in Oracle, and we've certainly had some from D3 in the past. They're mostly Tableau because we are Tableau guys who started it, but we're really happy to see other tools being used as well.
Let's take one more question before we close the round. We are almost 15 minutes over time already, but I think this was definitely worth it. Another question that I think came from one of my colleagues at Kiron, actually. How do you make sure to avoid bias when creating a visualization?
That's difficult, I think. I mean, I think when any one person narrates a certain story from data that they are using, I think it's kind of inevitable to have at least some sort of bias. I mean, even if it's just a bias of, you know, look, I mean, when I was looking at the data, I wanted to look at data from the Philippines because that's where I'm from. I mean, that in itself is a bit of a bias.
So bias is not always necessarily a problem,
It's
or
true.
is there always
It's not always a problem, but that's a really good question. And yeah.
The thing that you must do is always tell the truth. So long as you are, and a lot of data visualization experts will say this, so long as you're not deceiving with the data, so long as you are telling the truth, yes, technically just in choosing a certain data set and a certain story, it's a bit like being a journalist. You're making the decision of what you want to tell people, but then you just try and do it in an unbiased way and let people make their own minds up. Yes, you can visualize an emotive subject sometimes, but yeah, so long as you're not doing things like not starting your bar charts at zero, or things which are sort of well known as being really deceptive to people, as long as you are telling the truth with your data, then I think that's the best that you can do. It's a very long and interesting discussion to have, and it's one that I think if any of the 7 or 8 of us carried on, we could probably talk about for a long time, but maybe we'll leave that there.
Yeah, I think with these kind of like final words, it's a good moment to close off the session. Are there any last comments from any of the panelists, from you, Neil, or from anyone else before we close the session?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
And thank you to everyone who also created these visualizations. Without you guys, we wouldn't have been able to present anything at all.
Yeah, so thanks so much.
Yes, I particularly want to say thank you too. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So thank you everyone so much for participating, to all the panelists, of course, but also to the participants, to the attendees who are online with us right now. I'm not sure if some of you might have attended more of our sessions from the Refugee Conference. You will be able, as I mentioned before, to find most of the recordings or even all of the recordings in the YouTube channel of Kiron. So I'm sure there will be plenty of ways to continue the conversation on a lot of interesting topics that we've heard about today. So yeah, have a great rest of the evening or afternoon, or wherever you're joining us from. Have a great rest of the day. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talk to you soon at some point. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.